You're watching HRM TV. My name is Shalini Shukla. The risks associated with corporate travel are increasing in today's world, as can be seen from political unrest in Thailand and also the Manila bus hijack tragedy. Tony Ridley, Director of Security Services Asia Pacific for International SOS, tells us how we can manage these risks. Hi Tony, thank you for joining us today. Now, what are the major risks associated with global traveling, and what should an organization do to mitigate these risks?
Well, essentially, if you look at the risks or the threats in particular, because risk is what is the result of a threat. So you have threat, what you do, and then the residual risk. They typically fall into two broad categories. One is natural and the other one is man-made. So natural is things like storms, earthquakes, illnesses, those kind of things. Man-made are demonstrations, strikes, petty crimes, terrorism, and all of those sorts of things. What corporates and individuals should best do to prevent or mitigate those threats is plan, manage and respond. The greatest emphasis should be on the planning and management of travellers rather than focusing just on the post events and simply responding.
What about HR? What is the role of HR in this whole thing?
Well, HR are at the forefront, whether they want to or not. The reality is the expectations and demands for HR personnel has increased exponentially, particularly when it comes to travel. So they may be the custodians of the programs, they may be the buyers, they may be the managers. They play a pivotal role. Based on our survey findings and our experience, 60 to 80% of the ownership and responsibility sits with HR managers. But as we know, the problem is the expectations and demands have not been met with continuing education, experience or training to meet those particular requirements, which is in its own right a threat and a concern. What we're finding is when you look at travellers, they tend to be the top 20% or 15% talent of the organisation. If they're not looked after or they're unnecessarily exposed to risk, you've got real talent retention problems, you've got recruitment problems, and you have issues of asking them to go and travel when you're really not that interested or you don't do anything to look after them in the first place.
What about the role of International SOS in mitigating the risks of global travel?
Well, essentially, we help businesses. We help businesses by providing products and services that help them mitigate, manage or reduce the risks and threats associated with their travellers by providing medical, security and travel assistance so they don't have to do it themselves.
What is the gap in the current travel practices in terms of providing comprehensive care? And what is International SOS doing to plug the gap?
The biggest gap and the problem we see is that the solution for travel risk management is a team sport. There is no one service or product that solves absolutely everything. And in that team or that pie that makes up the solutions are brokers, travel management companies, insurance companies, and obviously assistants, which is what we do. So the biggest problem that we see is some people often think that just by having insurance it solves everything. Just by having travel management it solves everything. Assistance, we certainly don't solve everything. We are part of the solution. We are not exclusively a one-size-fits-all or solves every problem, silver bullet, panacea or whatever. And that's one of the biggest problems from the management and buyers perspective is they're using the wrong tools for the wrong tasks.
What are the general hurdles that you're facing in creating awareness of various travel-related security and safety issues? You mentioned earlier that a lack of training is a big problem here.
The biggest hurdle that we see is the perception of what individuals think is a threat or a risk in the first place. Low crime doesn't mean no crime. Low risk doesn't mean no risk. And the problem is that people assume they should only be prepared when they travel to the Afghanistans, the Pakistans, the Iraqs of the world, but in reality, every country in the world, every city in the world has risks and threats. It could be motor vehicle accidents. It could be where you're travelling, they drive on the opposite side of the road, so when you look this direction and step out, the cars are actually coming. So there's all types of threats and preparation. Even power plugs. You use the wrong one, you could get electrocuted. That's a big, big issue, is perception and the acceptance that people need to prepare themselves before they travel.
So you're saying this is not seen as important?
No, as I said, when it comes to business travel, most people think it's one of those byproducts of being in business. But if you've had to study a discipline, whether it be marketing, HR, finance, one of the ancillary processes, how do you effectively travel? How do you maximise your performance and productivity on the road? How do you log in remotely, use a mobile phone? All of those sorts of things people take for granted. There actually needs to be better planning and preparation and management of travellers, not just the risk, but travel in general, and by and large, we just don't see enough of it.
Let's talk about cost now. How much does it really cost companies to have a comprehensive risk management program?
Yeah, the sad part of that is that sometimes it can be cheaper than a cup of coffee a day. The associated costs for some processes can be as cheap as a cup of coffee a day. And then when we talk about the annuity programs or the whole of year processes and programs, more often than not, it's still cheaper than a return international flight. To cover one person with all of the advice, the content, the response, the capability, and a whole host of other things is often far cheaper than the cost of an international flight, particularly if someone's doing multiple flights, but everyone assumes it's a cost prohibitive. But when it comes down to the value of investment with the value of management, it's very, very cost effective, very cheap to be honest.
Thank you very much, Tony, for your insights.